So in my previous video about Shadow of War's microtransactions, I said that while microtransactions are a really shitty thing to have in a AAA, mainly single-player title, that you should largely ignore them if you can, and that alone should be enough to convey the message that, hey, we don't want this kind of stuff in our games. And this isn't really a matter of preference between sections of the player base either. Microtransactions in a game like this have been almost completely universally condemned. So it's been really interesting to come upon a recent article by Eurogamer, who interviews the lead designer to Shadow of War, and to see him justify these microtransactions and display this kind of air about the whole situation that there's an ongoing debate on whether they're acceptable or not in a game like Shadow of War, which is asinine in and of itself. So in this video we're going to take a look at what the designer says in the article when asked certain piercing questions regarding microtransactions, and it's going to be a lot of fun because you should hear some of the stuff he says. So let's just get to it. So Eurogamer starts off by asking Bob Roberts, the designer, what can you say to reassure the fans who will never buy a loot box that Shadow of War has still been balanced with them in mind? Bob Roberts basically says that they have worked on the game in such a way that the economies themselves are different. They play tested and tested everything with the loot boxes and the economy of real world money turned off, so that at the end of the day, everything is based around, just playing the game. Loot boxes aren't really a part of it. Things haven't been tuned or tweaked with loot boxes in mind, or so he claims. And I say that because while it is nice to see a designer come up and say that, hey, these things are completely separate, one hasn't been affected by another, they're saying things and then there's doing things, and we will find out for sure whether the game, when it fully releases, adheres to that design philosophy, because I would bet money that it won't. Because you're taking the word of the designer, of the guy or part of the team who put this into place, either of their own vocation or of the publishers who work above them and force them to do it. And in my opinion, that doesn't make you very trustworthy when it comes to things like this. And this segues pretty well into what Eurogamer says next, because some people think you guys have ulterior motives, that you're waiting for a tough bit to pop up an on-screen prompt saying, hey, have you seen what we're selling? And to that, Bob says, no, absolutely not, 100% not. Right. He then claims that there were some misconceptions. First, the concern about balancing. Hopefully, when it is out there and people are able to talk about it, their experiences, that the balancing question will be answered by people who play through it and see that, and not just naysayers. This to me still means nothing, because I have seen companies before say things in certain, or even show things in certain, and then once something releases, it's completely different. It's completely contrary 100% to what they originally showed or originally talked about. These things you just can't fully trust. And my point on that being that his vague answer didn't do a lot to sway me one way or the other. If anything, it just kind of seems just as shady as everything else he said so far, because he could have replaced everything he just said with a simple, you'll see, and it would have literally had the same effect. Bob then follows up in bringing up another point on misconception, saying that people thought that this game was online only, and he was saying, no, you can play the game offline, single player, no problem, and that's just another case of there being misconceptions all over the place, and that you can enjoy the game, the full experience, without having to spend any money. I mean, how many times have we heard that before though, right? Eurogamer then asks, which begs the question, why put microtransactions in at all? As a design director, your life is spent ensuring players don't get bottlenecked in certain places, that people never run out of resources when they really need them, so why complicate that? To which Bob responds that while you play the game, you earn the in-game resources at a regular pace that is fair in the eyes of anyone who is playing a game just to play the game and not spending money on it. And that from his perspective, the people who are protective of their spare time can opt to spend a little real money to make sure that they get that full experience given their time constraints, which I don't completely believe in that argument. If people don't have time to play a game, then they're likely just not going to buy it. Adding microtransactions to a game just so that people can get to that full experience faster only makes sense from the perspective that, hey, you're in it to make money and you're not in it to help the consumer in any way save time. Because if there's anything I've learned from the corporate world is that besides fear and virtue signaling, money is always going to be the primary motivator in anything you do, with helping others out of the kindness of your heart being a rare commodity, sadly. Bob, the head designer, then goes on to equate the difference of playing the game normally and having microtransactions to there being an easy mode and a hard mode. The hard mode being the way you play the game normally, you know, without spending money, and then the easy mode being, oh, you want to spend some money to bypass some of that difficulty. That, in my opinion, does not help his argument one bit. It ruins the experience. I mean, imagine if Dark Souls did this, where the game normally is pretty difficult and can be very frustrating, but there's an easy mode, so to speak, and it's not that the easy mode makes the game easier, it's that there's microtransactions that allow you to gain power or to skip content using your debit or credit card. Not only would that ruin and cheapen the experience for those who decided to spend money in the game to bypass difficulty, but I bet you $100 a lot of people would start calling Dark Souls Dark Shills. And that's kind of what's happening here with Shadow of War. And I love how Bob says that it's all about giving the player more control to play it on hard or to play it on easy, e.g. you play it normally or spend real money. Because actual control would be giving the player more opportunities to earn the things that instead you have to pay money for. Because here's the interesting thing about these loot boxes. Not only do you have loot boxes for consumable orcs, but you also have loot boxes for actual loot with varying rarities, so you can literally buy, likely, the best loot in the game if you're lucky, or if you spend enough money. But on top of that, there are even consumables that come in the loot boxes with the orcs that allow you to change or upgrade the orcs or do all of these other things, which I'm assuming will be difficult on their own to earn for free. So what real control would be giving players the tools to earn those things easier, or to earn those things in other various ways instead of just one way, which of course makes buying loot boxes much more enticing, because you only have that one way, that one choice, to grind or to buy. When asked if he himself personally will pay for loot boxes, Bob the designer responds that he personally probably will just let the system dictate his rewards as he designed it as a designer. So he's just going to play the game normally and leave it at that. He says he can relate to the people who worry about balancing, and that he shares their own perspective about how the use of microtransactions would skew that balance. And he himself wants to share that unskewed, non-microtransaction perspective of gameplay so that as a developer, as a designer, he can go in and change anything later if something is unbalanced. But to me, that all just feels a little disingenuous. And then we get a big, hard-hitting question from Eurogamer. Speaking generally, do you think it's fair for full-price AAA games to feature loot boxes like that? I have chosen to pay for them in the past in other games on the odd occasion, and I'm still not sure how I feel about it. To which Bob, the lead designer, responds with, you put your $60 in for a big game like ours up front, and our focus is that its initial price point is more than worth it. You want people to be pleasantly surprised by how much stuff is in it. He totally skirts that entire question. That is a typical PR response if I've ever heard one. Bob then goes on to say that microtransactions in AAA games are a charged topic and are frankly complicated. He says the debate plays out online in forum threads where people argue whether they are acceptable or not. Here's the thing though, I haven't visited a place where people argue for the use of microtransactions on a large enough level to be a 50-50 argument, or even a 60-40 argument, or even a 70-30 argument. I've only seen like a handful of people argue for microtransactions, and then like everybody else is against it, and I think that's the way it should be. We simply, and I do understand that developers need money. That makes sense, right? I mean, but for a $60 game with potential DLCs down the road that, you know, cost money too, and we're talking, especially with different versions of the game that cost anywhere from $80, $100, and $300, you're telling me that a game that will likely sell 2, 3, 5 million copies with all those different variants that give you lots of money, that's not enough? I don't believe you. He goes on and on about that same topic a little bit further, saying how it's interesting to see all these discussions about loot boxes and all these articles coming out, and I don't know what he's seeing because all I see is universal disdain for this practice. Bob really seems eager to write off these microtransactions as much as possible, though, especially if you look at his last line. It's interesting to see the discussion, but we want to get people's opinions on more than just that. Well, it's kind of hard to do that when microtransactions at a base level taint your game, at least in a lot of players' minds. In my mind, yeah, it taints the game if I partake in that system, but I'm not going to. I'm going to try to enjoy the game as it is, as it was designed, hopefully not around any microtransactions of the sort, and we'll go from there. So from this article as a whole, all we learned is that this guy, the lead designer, 1, isn't going to use his own system, 2, skirts around the problem whenever possible, and 3 is disingenuous about almost every facet of what microtransactions actually brings to the game from both a gameplay perspective and an ideological perspective. And this saddens me. It's not going to stop my my purchase of the game, and I'm certainly not going to be buying any microtransactions, that is for fucking sure, but I'm going to be definitely keeping an eye on the system itself, and I will report on it later on once it is released, or if any other interesting news comes up for sure. This stuff gets me a little heated and a little disappointed to see, you know, good AAA developers doing this kind of shady bullshit. So let me know what you think in the comments down below regarding these shady practices. I'd love to know your thoughts and your opinions, and we will go from there. We'll have a discussion about it. If you enjoyed the video, then you know what buttons to press to make me happy as a YouTuber, and I thank you for it. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time. Oh, and get your shit together, WB.